I was sitting at the corner table of the rooftop grill watching the Austin skyline light up through floor-to-ceiling windows, when Jessica leaned forward with that practiced smile she'd perfected for her real estate clients. "Maya, honey," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "we really need to talk about your dating expectations. They're just unrealistic. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The words hit me like ice water, especially since my date Ryan was sitting right there, calmly cutting into his steak like he hadn't just been insulted by proxy. Brad, Jessica's boyfriend, chuckled and raised his craft beer. "Seriously, Maya, you're 28. Maybe it's time to lower the bar a little." He gestured toward Ryan with his bottle. "I mean, this guy seems nice enough, but when's the last time you dated someone who could actually afford to take you somewhere like this?" I felt my cheeks burn as several nearby tables turned to glance our way. Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. That's when I realized how this entire evening had been orchestrated, not as a fun double date between friends, but as some kind of intervention about my so-called unrealistic standards. What happened next would change everything I thought I knew about love, friendship, and the power of assumptions. The whole mess started 3 days earlier when I ran into Jessica at Central Market. I was picking up ingredients for my weekly meal prep, pushing my cart past the organic produce section when I heard someone call my name. Jessica Rodriguez stood near the artisanal cheese display, perfectly styled in head-to-toe Lululemon, her freshly highlighted hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the market's skylights. "Maya, oh my God, I haven't seen you in forever," she squealed, pulling me into one of those air kisses that never quite makes contact. We'd known each other since college at UT, though our friendship had grown increasingly strained as our priorities diverged after graduation. While I focused on building my career at Bloom Marketing Agency, Jessica had thrown herself into Austin's social scene, documenting every brunch and boutique opening on her Instagram account. "How are you, Jess?" I asked, genuinely trying to be warm despite our recent distance. "I saw on social media that you closed on that lake house property. Congratulations." Her face lit up with the kind of excitement she usually reserved for designer sample sales. "Thank you. Yes, it was a 7-figure deal, and the commission was absolutely insane." Brad and I celebrated at UT afterward. She paused, studying my basket filled with sensible groceries and meal prep containers. "Speaking of Brad, we've been talking and we're worried about you." The word worried sent a small chill down my spine. "Worried about what?" Jessica glanced around the market as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Your dating life, sweetie. Or should I say, lack thereof. When's the last time you actually went on a date? And I mean a real date, not just meeting some random guy from Bumble for coffee." I bristled at her tone but tried to keep my voice level. "I've been focused on work lately. We landed the Morrison account last month and it's been consuming most of my time." "That's exactly what I mean," Jessica said, her expression shifting to what she probably thought was compassionate concern. "You're so focused on your career that you're missing out on life. You're not getting any younger, Maya, and frankly your standards have become a little, well, unrealistic." The accusation stung more than I expected. "What do you mean by unrealistic?" Jessica sighed dramatically, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "You reject guys because they don't read enough books, or because they care about sports, or because they drive a truck instead of a hybrid. You turned down that investment banker because he didn't know who wrote Pride and Prejudice. I mean, come on, not every guy is going to be some intellectual poet who drives a Prius and volunteers at animal shelters in his spare time." Heat crept up my neck. "I don't expect perfection, Jess. I just want someone who shares my values. Someone who's curious about the world, who treats people with respect, who has emotional intelligence." "I don't think that's asking too much." "Emotional intelligence," she repeated with air quotes, rolling her eyes. "See, this is what I'm talking about. You've created this impossible checklist that no real man can live up to. Meanwhile, you're going to end up alone, because you refuse to be practical about dating." Before I could respond, she grabbed my arm with sudden enthusiasm. "Actually, this is perfect timing. Brad has a friend visiting from LA this weekend, and we were thinking of doing a double date. Nothing fancy, just dinner. It'll be good for you to get back out there and practice being more flexible with your expectations." Something about the way she said flexible made my stomach turn, but I found myself nodding anyway. Maybe she had a point. Maybe I had been too rigid in my standards. Maybe it was time to give someone a chance, even if they didn't check every box on my mental list. His name is Ryan, Jessica continued, already pulling out her phone to coordinate details. He's really sweet, very down to earth. Honestly, he might be perfect for you if you can just keep an open mind and not overthink everything. That's how I found myself spending Saturday afternoon at Nordstrom in the Domain, searching for an outfit that struck the right balance between looking nice and not appearing to try too hard. My roommate Sophie had insisted on coming along to provide moral support and fashion advice. I still don't understand why you're nervous, Sophie said, holding up a navy wrap dress against my frame. It's just dinner with people you already know. I smoothed my hands over the fabric, checking my reflection in the dressing room mirror. I guess I'm nervous because Jessica made such a big deal about my dating status. What if she's right? What if I have been too picky? Sophie raised an eyebrow. Maya, you're one of the most genuine, thoughtful people I know. Wanting a partner.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Partner who actually engages with the world and treats people well isn't being picky. It's having self-respect. But maybe I'm missing out on good guys because I'm too focused on things that don't really matter. I said, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me since the conversation at Central Market. Name one thing on your supposed list that doesn't actually matter, Sophie challenged. I thought for a moment.
Well, maybe the guy doesn't need to love reading as much as I do.
Maybe he just needs to respect that I love books, even if he prefers podcasts or documentaries. That sounds reasonable to me, Sophie said. What else? Maybe he doesn't need to drive a fuel-efficient car. Maybe he just needs to be environmentally conscious in other ways, or at least not actively hostile to the idea of sustainability. Also reasonable. Maybe he doesn't need to volunteer regularly, as long as he's kind to service workers and doesn't treat people poorly based on their job or income level. Sophie smiled. Maya, listen to yourself. Everything you just described is basic human decency and compatibility. Those aren't unrealistic standards. Those are the bare minimum requirements for dating a decent person. But Jessica's words continued to echo in my head as I selected the navy dress and a pair of comfortable heels. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I should approach this date with a completely open mind and see what happened. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected. I spent an hour getting ready, choosing simple jewelry and keeping my makeup natural. I wanted to look like myself, not some artificial version designed to impress a stranger. As I grabbed my purse and keys, Sophie called out from the living room. Remember, you're amazing exactly as you are. Don't let anyone make you feel like you need to settle for less than you deserve. The rooftop grill was exactly the kind of place Jessica would choose for maximum social media impact. Located on the 7th floor of a downtown high-rise, it offered panoramic views of Lady Bird Lake and the Austin skyline. The hostess led me to a corner table where Jessica and Brad were already seated, Jessica's phone propped against the wine list as she took photos of her cocktail. Maya, you look gorgeous, Jessica said, standing to give me another air kiss. I love that dress on you. Very classic, very safe. The word safe felt like a backhanded compliment, but I smiled and took my seat. Brad nodded hello without looking up from his phone, where he appeared to be scrolling through sports highlights. So where's this mysterious friend of yours? I asked, glancing around the busy restaurant. Ryan said he's running a few minutes late. Brad replied, finally putting his phone face down on the table. Traffic from the airport apparently. He flew in this morning for some meetings. Jessica leaned forward eagerly. I'm so excited for you to meet him, Maya. He's exactly what you need right now. Very normal, very uncomplicated. No weird quirks or intellectual pretensions. The way she said intellectual pretensions made it clear that she viewed my love of books and thoughtful conversation as character flaws rather than preferences. I was beginning to regret agreeing to this dinner when I spotted someone approaching our table. Ryan Mitchell looked nothing like what I'd expected based on Jessica's description. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. He wore dark jeans, a simple white button-down shirt, and a navy blazer that looked expensive but understated. There was something magnetic about his presence, a quiet confidence that made heads turn as he walked through the restaurant. Sorry I'm late, he said, extending his hand to me first. You must be Maya. I'm Ryan. His handshake was firm and warm, and when our eyes met, I felt an unexpected flutter in my stomach. There was an intensity to his gaze that made me feel like he was actually seeing me, not just looking in my general direction. It's nice to meet you, I managed, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. He greeted Jessica and Brad with easy familiarity before taking the seat across from me. I hope you haven't been waiting long. My driver got turned around trying to find the parking garage. Driver, Jessica's eyebrows shot up with interest. Ryan looked slightly uncomfortable. Just an Uber. I don't really know my way around Austin yet. Jessica's expression shifted to something that looked almost like disappointment, and I caught her exchanging a meaningful glance with Brad. I got the distinct impression that they'd been hoping for a different answer. So Ryan, Jessica said, her real estate agent smile sliding back into place. Tell Maya what you do for work. I know Brad mentioned you're visiting from LA. Ryan paused for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. I work in entertainment. Nothing too exciting, mostly behind-the-scenes stuff. Oh, like production? I asked, genuinely curious. Something like that, he said with a small smile. But I'm much more interested in hearing about what you do, Maya. Brad mentioned you work in marketing. For the next hour, Ryan asked thoughtful questions about my work, my interests, and my perspective on Austin as a city. He listened intently to my answers, asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually paying attention, and shared stories about his own experiences that were funny without being crude or self-aggrandizing. He was exactly the kind of person I enjoyed talking to. Curious, articulate, and genuinely interested in connecting with another human being. Which made what happened next so much more painful. As we finished our main courses, Jessica set down her wine glass with the decisive clink of someone about to make an important announcement. So Maya, she said. Her voice taking on that false concern tone I was beginning to recognize. Now that we've all had a chance to get to know each other, I think this is a perfect opportunity to address something Brad and I have been discussing. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Brad leaned back in his chair, looking pleased with himself. We've been thinking about your dating situation, and we realize that part of the problem might be your approach, your expectations. Ryan's fork paused halfway to his mouth, but he didn't say anything. I could feel my face growing hot with embarrassment. I don't understand, I said quietly, hoping to keep this conversation from becoming a public spectacle. Jessica reached across the table and patted my hand in a gesture that felt more condescending than comforting. Sweetie, we love you, but you have to admit that your standards are a little intense. You reject perfectly nice guys for the most ridiculous reasons. Like what? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Like that guy David from my Christmas party, Brad said, counting on his fingers. You didn't give him a chance because he'd never heard of some obscure author you liked. It was Shakespeare, I said defensively. And he bragged about never reading books, then mocked me for enjoying literature. Jessica waved dismissively. See, this is exactly what we mean. You're so focused on these intellectual compatibility issues that you miss out on guys who could make you happy in other ways. Ryan set down his fork and looked directly at me. What kind of things are important to you in a relationship? It was the first time anyone had asked me that question directly, without judgment or mockery. I want someone who's curious about the world, I said, feeling suddenly vulnerable. Someone who treats people with kindness, regardless of their job or social status. Someone who can have a real conversation about something other than sports or the stock market. Someone who makes me laugh and challenges me to think differently about things. Those sound like pretty reasonable expectations to me, Ryan said quietly. Jessica laughed, a sound that carried more edge than humor. Oh, come on. Maya, you literally have a mental checklist. The guy has to read books, drive an environmentally friendly car, volunteer for charity, be emotionally available, share your political views, and probably a dozen other things I'm forgetting. No real man is going to check all those boxes. Especially not guys in our social circle. Brad added. You're not exactly going to find your dream guy at happy hour with our crowd. Maybe it's time to be more realistic about what's actually available. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I could feel other diners glancing our way, drawn by the rising tension at our table. Ryan's expression had grown very still, his dark eyes moving between Jessica and Brad, with something that looked like controlled anger. More realistic. I repeated slowly. Exactly, Jessica said, apparently missing the dangerous quiet in my voice. Like maybe the guy doesn't need to be a bookworm. Maybe he just needs to be successful and reliable. Maybe he drives a pickup truck because he needs it for work, not because he's trying to destroy the environment. Maybe he watches football on Sundays instead of reading poetry, but he's still a good provider who'll treat you well. Brad nodded enthusiastically. And maybe he's not going to spend an hour discussing the symbolism in some pretentious movie, but he'll remember your birthday and take you on nice vacations. That's worth something, right? I felt like I was drowning in their words, each suggestion another weight pulling me under. These were supposed to be my friends, people who cared about my happiness. But every word they spoke made me feel smaller and more foolish for wanting what I wanted. I mean, look at Ryan here, Jessica continued, gesturing toward my date with the casual cruelty of someone who thought she was being helpful. He seems like a perfectly nice guy. Maybe he's not going to quote Dostoevsky over dinner, but he's polite, he's attractive, he showed up on time. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes good enough really is good enough. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's face had gone completely expressionless. The warmth and humor that had characterized our conversation throughout dinner now, hidden behind a mask of careful neutrality. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, and emerge somewhere far away from this humiliating moment. You know what? Ryan said finally, his voice dangerously calm. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his phone, which had been buzzing intermittently throughout dinner. With deliberate slowness, he turned the screen toward our table. The lock screen showed dozens of notifications, missed calls, text messages, social media mentions, but it was the contact name at the top of the most recent message that made Jessica's wine glass slip from her suddenly nerveless fingers. The message was from someone listed as Manager Ridget. But that wasn't what made the blood drain from Jessica's face. It was the photo associated with the contact, a professional headshot that clearly showed Ryan's face, along with a name that made Brad's mouth fall open in shock. Because Ryan Mitchell wasn't just some random guy from LA who worked behind the scenes in entertainment. Ryan Mitchell was one of the most recognizable actors of our generation, with 3 blockbuster films and an Emmy-nominated television series to his credit. His face had graced magazine covers, billboards, and movie posters around the world. He was the kind of celebrity who caused traffic jams when at coffee shops, whose relationship status was regularly debated on entertainment blogs, who had been named one of the most eligible bachelors in Hollywood just 6 months earlier. And he had just spent the last 2 hours listening to my supposed friends explain why I needed to lower my standards and settle for good enough. The restaurant seemed to freeze around us as recognition dawned on Jessica's face. Her perfectly applied lipstick had left a smudge on the rim of her water glass, and she was staring at Ryan with the kind of wide-eyed show usually reserved for natural disasters or lottery winners. Brad's mouth was still hanging open, his craft beer forgotten in his hand as foam slowly dissipated on the surface. Ryan calmly placed his phone face down on the white tablecloth and took a sip of his wine, seemingly unbothered by the seismic shift that had just occurred at our table. The warm brown eyes that had been so focused on me throughout dinner now held a different quality. Not anger exactly, but a cool assessment that made me realize he'd been evaluating this entire situation from the moment he sat down. "I'm sorry," Jessica stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't realize." "Realize what?" Ryan asked mildly, cutting a piece of his steak with surgical precision. "That I might actually be capable of reading a book. That I might have thoughts about something other than sports and stock portfolios. That I might be the kind of person who treats waitstaff with respect and knows who wrote Shakespeare." The words hung in the air like accusations, and I felt my stomach twist with a combination of mortification and something that might have been hope. Had he really been paying that much attention to our conversation? Had he actually heard the way Jessica and Brad had been systematically dismantling my worth as a person? "We were just trying to help." "Maya," Brad said weakly, finally finding his voice. She's been single for a while, and we figured maybe she needed to adjust her expectations." Ryan's lip was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. Adjust her expectations. Interesting phrase. He turned to look at me directly, and I felt the full force of his attention like a physical weight. "Maya, what exactly are these unrealistic standards that need adjusting?" I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on us now, drawn by the tension radiating from our corner table. A server approached hesitantly, probably wondering if we needed anything. But one look at our group dynamic sent him retreating towards safer tables. The Austin skyline twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, oblivious to the social earthquake happening inside. I started, then stuck. How could I explain that my so-called standards were simply wanting to be with someone who saw me as an equal, someone who valued conversation and connection over surface-level attraction, someone who didn't make me feel like I needed to apologize for having interests and opinions. She wants guys who read books, Jessica said, apparently deciding that honesty was her best strategy now that her entire worldview had been upended. And who care about the environment? And who can talk about art and politics and literature? She turned down a perfectly nice investment banker because he didn't know basic literary references. He called Pride and Prejudice chick lit trash, and said reading fiction was a waste of time. I said quietly, finding my voice. Then he spent an hour explaining why emotional intelligence was just a buzzword invented by weak people. Ryan nodded slowly, as if filing this information away. And that seemed unreasonable to you? He asked Jessica. Well, when you put it like that, Jessica faltered, her real estate agent confidence finally cracking under pressure. Let me understand this correctly, Ryan continued, his voice remaining conversational even as his words grew more pointed. Maya expects potential partners to be curious about the world, kind to others regardless of their social status, and capable of engaging in meaningful conversation. She wants someone who shares at least some of her values and interests. She refuses to settle for men who openly mock the things she cares about or treat her intellect as a character flaw rather than an asset. He paused, taking another sip of wine. And you consider this unrealistic? It's not that simple, Brad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Dating is about compromise. You can't expect to find someone who checks every box on your list. Who said anything about every box? Ryan asked. It sounds like Maya's looking for basic compatibility and mutual respect. That's not a checklist. That's the foundation of any healthy relationship. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness but from the strange relief of finally hearing someone articulate what I'd been trying to explain for months. Here was a person who understood that wanting to be valued for my mind as well as my appearance wasn't asking too much, that expecting kindness and intellectual curiosity wasn't setting the bar impossibly high. Jessica seemed to realize that her position was becoming increasingly indefensible. Look, we just want Maya to be happy, she said, switching to a more conciliatory tone. She's been single for 2 years, and we're worried that she's missing out on good relationships because she's too focused on finding someone perfect. 2 years, Ryan repeated thoughtfully. And in those 2 years, how many actually good relationships has she missed out on? How many genuinely kind, curious, emotionally intelligent men has she rejected for superficial reasons? The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. In 2 years of dating in Austin, I'd encountered countless men who expected me to be grateful for their attention regardless of how they treated me. Men who interrupted me when I spoke, who rolled their eyes when I mentioned books or art, who assumed that my job in marketing meant I was just killing time until I found a husband to support me. Men who took me to expensive restaurants but spoke rudely to the servers, who bragged about their salaries, but had never read a newspaper, who expected physical intimacy without emotional investment. The problem isn't Maya's standards, Ryan said quietly. The problem is that she's been told her entire life that wanting respect and compatibility makes her difficult. That expecting men to see her as an equal partner rather than a pretty accessory makes her demanding. That refusing to settle for someone who makes her feel small and unvalued makes her unrealistic. His words hit me like a revelation, crystallizing thoughts I'd been unable to articulate even to myself. How many times had I been told I was too picky or too independent or too intellectual for my own good? How many well-meaning friends had suggested I smile more, laugh at jokes that weren't funny, pretend to be less interested in books and more interested in sports? I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what constitutes reasonable expectations in dating, Ryan continued, his attention now fully focused on Jessica and Brad. Maya doesn't need to lower her standards. The men she's been meeting need to raise their. Jessica's face had gone through several color changes during this conversation, settling finally on a pale pink that clashed with her carefully chosen lipstick. We didn't know, she said weakly. About who you are, I mean. If you had known, you would have treated Maya's preferences differently, Ryan asked, Her standards would suddenly become reasonable if you discovered she was having dinner with someone you recognized from magazine covers. The implication was clear and devastating. Jessica and Brad's entire worldview was built on external validation and social status. They couldn't conceive of judging someone's worth based on character or compatibility because they'd never learned to value those qualities in themselves. "That's not what I meant," Jessica protested, but her voice was barely audible. "Isn't it?" Ryan asked gently. "Because it seems to me that you've spent the entire evening explaining to Maya why she should be grateful for attention from any man, regardless of how he treats her. You've told her that wanting intellectual connection is pretentious, that expecting kindness is unrealistic, that hoping for shared values is asking too much. But now that you know who I am, suddenly those same qualities seem more reasonable." I watched this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. Part of me was grateful that someone was finally defending my right to have standards, to expect more from relationships than simple physical attraction and financial stability. But another part of me was mortified that this defense was coming from someone I'd just met, someone who was essentially a stranger despite the easy conversation we'd shared over dinner. "I think maybe we should get the check," I said quietly, hoping to end this increasingly uncomfortable situation before it got worse. Ryan turned to look at me, and something in his expression softened. "Of course I'm sorry if I made this awkward for you." "You didn't make it awkward," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "They did." The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Jessica and Brad had orchestrated this entire evening as some kind of intervention, determined to convince me that my expectations were unreasonable and my approach to dating was fundamentally flawed. They'd brought me here not to introduce me to someone they thought I'd genuinely connect with, but to demonstrate why I needed to settle for less than what I wanted. "Maya," Jessica started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No," I said, finding strength in Ryan's quiet support. "I don't want to hear any more about my
Unrealistic standards or my need to compromise. I don't want to hear about how I'm too picky or too difficult or too focused on things that don't matter. I'm tired of being made to feel like wanting respect and compatibility makes me some kind of impossible perfectionist." My voice was getting stronger with each word, fueled by months of accumulated frustration and the sudden clarity that Ryan's perspective had provided. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for partnership. I'm asking for someone who sees my mind as an asset rather than a liability, who values conversation and connection, who treats other people with basic human dignity. If that makes me unrealistic, then I'd rather be unrealistic than settled." The restaurant continued to buzz around us, other diners enjoying their Saturday evening meals without the drama unfolding at our corner table. A couple at the table next to us was celebrating an anniversary, sharing dessert and laughing at private jokes. At another table, a group of friends was taking photos with their phones, documenting what was clearly a special occasion. Normal people enjoying normal relationships built on mutual affection and respect. "I think I'd like to leave now," I said, reaching for my purse. Ryan was already signaling for the server, his movements efficient and decisive. "Absolutely. Would you like me to drive you home?" The offer was casual, but something in his tone made it clear that he was genuinely concerned about my well-being, rather than trying to extend the evening for his own benefit. After 2 hours of being told that my expectations were unreasonable, his simple consideration felt like a revelation. "I drove myself," I said, "but thank you." "Of course you did," he said with a small smile. "Independent and practical. 2 more qualities that apparently make you impossible to date." Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. There was something about his dry humor and obvious intelligence that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in months of disappointing dates and well-meaning advice from friends who didn't understand what I was looking for. The server approached our table with the practiced caution of someone who had clearly noticed the tension in our group dynamic. Ryan handled the check with smooth efficiency, declining Brad's half-hearted offer to split the bill and leaving what I suspected was an exceptionally generous tip. Throughout this process, Jessica sat in stunned silence, apparently still processing the evening's revelations. As we prepared to leave, Ryan turned to Jessica and Brad one final time. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think Maya's standards are exactly what they should be. The problem isn't that she expects too much. The problem is that too many people expect too little." We walked toward the elevator in a silence that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. The hostess smiled and thanked us for coming, apparently unaware of the social disaster that had just unfolded at table 12.
Other diners continued their conversations, couples held hands over candlelit tables, and the Austin skyline continued to sparkle beyond the windows as if nothing had changed. But something had changed, at least for me. For the first time in months, I felt validated in my approach to dating and relationships. Someone had looked at my so-called unrealistic standards and found them not only reasonable but admirable. Someone had understood that refusing to settle wasn't the same as demanding perfection. The elevator arrived with a soft chime and we stepped inside together. Ryan pressed the button for the parking garage, and I found myself studying his reflection in the polished steel doors. Even now, knowing who he was, he seemed remarkably normal. Approachable, kind. "I'm sorry about that," I said as the elevator descended. I had no idea they were planning some kind of intervention about my dating life. "You have nothing to apologize for," Ryan said firmly. "They ambushed you. They used dinner as an opportunity to systematically tear down your self-worth and convince you to accept less than you deserve. That's not friendship, that's manipulation." The elevator doors opened to reveal the parking garage, a dimly lit concrete space filled with the cars of other Saturday night diners. Somewhere in this maze of vehicles was my practical Honda Civic, reliable and fuel-efficient and completely unremarkable. The kind of car that probably disappointed people like Jessica, who measured success by the size of your engine and the prestige of your brand name. "Where are you parked?" Ryan asked. "Level 2, near the stairwell," I said. "What about you? Your Uber driver is probably wondering where you are." Ryan paused, looking slightly embarrassed. I may have been less than completely honest about the Uber situation. "What do you mean?" He led me toward a section of the garage I hadn't explored, where a sleek black Tesla sat alone under a flickering fluorescent light. The car was beautiful in an understated way, clearly expensive but not ostentatious. Exactly the kind of vehicle someone might choose if they wanted reliable luxury without making a statement about their wealth. "I drove myself," he admitted. "I just didn't want to deal with the assumptions people make when they see certain cars. Especially after what your friends said about your supposed obsession with environmentally friendly vehicles." I stared at him, trying to process this new information. "You bought a Tesla specifically because you care about environmental issues." "Among other reasons," he said with a slight smile. "I also think Elon Musk is probably insane, but that's a conversation for another time." The casual way he dismissed one of the most famous entrepreneurs in the world made me laugh despite the emotional weight of the evening. Here was someone who could afford any car in the world, who could probably buy a different luxury vehicle for every day of the week, and he'd chosen to drive something that aligned with his values rather than his bank account. "Maya," he said, his voice growing more serious. "I want you to know that everything your friend said tonight was wrong. Your standards aren't unrealistic. Your expectations aren't too high. You shouldn't have to apologize for wanting partnership and respect and intellectual connection. Those are basic requirements for any healthy relationship." I felt tears threatening again, not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of finally being understood. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I needed to hear that." "You shouldn't need to hear it," he replied. "You should be surrounded by people who already know it. Friends who support your standards instead of trying to tear them down. People who celebrate your intelligence instead of treating it like a character flaw." We stood there in the fluorescent-lit parking garage, two people who had just met but who seemed to understand each other in a way that felt both surprising and natural. Around us, the concrete walls echoed with the distant sounds of car engines and elevator bells, the normal soundtrack of people going about their Saturday evening routines. "I should probably let you get going," I said reluctantly. "You probably have early meetings tomorrow, or interviews, or whatever it is that famous people do on Sunday mornings." Ryan laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off the garage walls. "Actually, I was planning to sleep late and maybe explore Austin a little. I've never spent much time here outside of work obligations. I was thinking about checking out some of those bookstores you mentioned during dinner, maybe walking around downtown." The casual mention of bookstores sent a warm flutter through my chest. After months of dates with men who treated my love of reading like an eccentric hobby, here was someone who had actually listened when I talked about my favorite independent bookshops and literary events around the city. "Book People is amazing," I heard myself saying. "And if you're interested in local authors, there's a great section on Austin writers." Plus, they usually have events on Sunday afternoons, readings, book clubs, discussions about everything from poetry to environmental policy. Environmental policy discussions at a bookstore, Ryan said thoughtfully. Sounds like the kind of pretentious intellectual activity that would make you impossible to date. His deadpan delivery made me burst into laughter, the first genuine laugh I'd had all evening. Absolutely. I'm probably the only person in Austin who finds environmental policy discussions entertaining. It's one of my many character flaws. Along with reading fiction and expecting men to treat you with respect, he added solemnly. You really are a catch. We smiled at each other in the dim garage lighting, and I felt something shift between us. Not romance exactly, but recognition. The sense that here was someone who understood not just what I was looking for in a relationship, but why those things mattered. Someone who didn't think my interests made me difficult or my standards made me unrealistic. I should really get going, I said again, but with less conviction than before. Of course, Ryan said. Drive safely. And Maya, yeah, don't let tonight make you doubt yourself. Don't let their opinions change what you know you want and deserve. Your standards aren't the problem, their lack of standards is the problem. As I walked toward my car, I could feel him watching to make sure I got there safely. It was a small gesture, the kind of consideration that probably seemed automatic to him, but that meant everything to me after an evening of being told I expected too much from people. I sat in my Honda Civic for several minutes after starting the engine, trying to process everything that had happened. 3 hours ago, I'd walked into the rooftop grill thinking I was meeting my friends for a casual double date. I'd been subjected to a systematic critique of my approach to relationships, defended by a complete stranger who turned out to be one of the most famous actors in Hollywood, and forced to confront the reality that the people I'd considered friends had been undermining my self-worth for months. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sophie. How's the date going? Is he as normal and uncomplicated as Jessica promised? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. It's complicated, I'll tell you everything when I get home. As I drove through downtown Austin, past the familiar landmarks and late-night crowds, I found myself thinking about everything Ryan had said. About standards and expectations and the difference between demanding perfection and expecting respect. About the way society teaches women to be grateful for any attention, regardless of how that attention makes them feel about themselves. For 2 years I'd been told by friends, family members, and well-meaning strangers that my approach to dating was fundamentally flawed. That I was too picky, too independent, too intellectual for my own good, that I needed to lower my expectations and be more realistic about what was available. But sitting in that parking garage, listening to Ryan articulate everything I'd been feeling but couldn't express, I realized that my standards weren't the problem. The problem was that I'd been looking for connection in a world that valued surface over substance, status over character, convenience over compatibility. The problem wasn't that I expected too much. The problem was that everyone else expected too little. I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot feeling like my entire world had shifted on its axis. The familiar sight of my building should have been comforting after such an emotionally turbulent evening, but instead I sat in my car staring up at the windows of my second-floor loft, trying to reconcile the person who had left for dinner 3 hours ago, with the person returning home now. My phone had been buzzing intermittently during the drive, notifications I'd been ignoring while navigating Austin's Saturday night traffic. Now sitting in the relative quiet of the parking lot, I finally looked at the screen. 7 missed calls from Jessica, 12 text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, and a string of increasingly frantic messages from Sophie asking if I was okay. The first text from Jessica was sent just 10 minutes after I'd left the restaurant. Maya, please call me. We need to talk about what happened tonight. The second came 5 minutes later. I know you're upset, but you have to understand we were just trying to help. By the 7th message her tone had shifted completely. Do you have any idea who that was? Do you understand what just happened? Call me back now. I scrolled through the messages from unknown numbers, all variations on the same theme. Apparently someone at the restaurant had recognized Ryan and word was spreading through Austin's social media networks like wildfire. Photos were already appearing on Instagram stories and Twitter feeds, grainy images taken from across the restaurant showing our table during what had clearly been an intense conversation. One message caught my attention because it came from my coworker Emma Walsh, who had somehow gotten wind of the situation despite not being anywhere near the rooftop grill. "Girl, you need to call me immediately. There are photos of you with Ryan Mitchell all over social media, and the internet is losing its mind. Are you okay? Where are you?" I climbed the stairs to my apartment feeling like I was moving through thick fog. Everything seemed simultaneously hyper-real and completely surreal, as if I'd accidentally stepped into someone else's life and couldn't find my way back to my own reality. Sophie was waiting for me in our living room, laptop open on the coffee table, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained excitement. "Maya," she said, jumping up from the couch, "thank God you're home. I've been worried sick. Emma called me 20 minutes ago saying there were photos of you with some famous actors circulating online, and then Jessica started blowing up your phone, and I didn't know if you were hurt or kidnapped or what." I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and sank into our oversized armchair, suddenly exhausted by the weight of everything that had happened. "It's been a very strange evening," I said, which felt like the understatement of the century. Sophie grabbed her laptop and came to sit on the arm of my chair. "Look at this," she said, angling the screen toward me. "Someone posted this photo on Twitter about an hour ago, and it's already been shared thousands of times." The image showed our corner table at the rooftop grill, taken from somewhere across the restaurant with what must have been a powerful phone camera. Ryan was clearly visible in profile, his hand resting on the table as he leaned forward intently. I was partially obscured by the angle, but my posture suggested someone engaged in serious conversation. Jessica and Brad were also in the frame, their body language radiating obvious tension. The caption read, "Is this Ryan Mitchell on a date in Austin? And why does the girl at the table look like she's about to cry? Drama at the rooftop grill tonight." "There are more," Sophie said, scrolling through her browser tabs. "Someone else got a video of him walking to the elevator with you, and there's another photo of him in the parking garage. Maya, people are trying to figure out who you are. They're calling you Mystery Date Girl, and speculating about whether you're his new girlfriend." I stared at the screen, watching my private humiliation transform into public entertainment. Comments poured in beneath each post, strangers analyzing my appearance, speculating about my background, debating whether I was pretty enough to be dating someone like Ryan Mitchell. The casual cruelty of internet strangers felt like salt in an already raw wound. "This is insane," I said quietly. 3 hours ago I was just Maya Chen, marketing coordinator going to dinner with friends. Now I'm some kind of internet mystery that thousands of people are discussing like I'm not a real person. Sophie closed the laptop and turned to face me fully. "Okay, forget about social media for a minute. Tell me what actually happened tonight. Was Jessica right about this being a setup? Who is this guy really, and why do you look like you've been through an emotional blender?" I told her everything, starting with the awkward conversation at Central Market and ending with Ryan's quiet defense of my standards in the restaurant parking garage. Sophie listened without interruption, her expressions shifting from confusion to anger to amazement as the story unfolded. "Wait," she said, when I finished. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Jessica and Brad invited you to dinner specifically to convince you that your dating standards are unrealistic. They brought along someone they thought would be a perfect example of why you need to lower your expectations. Except it turns out this guy is actually a famous actor who completely agrees with your standards and thinks Jessica and Brad are shallow idiots." "That's a fairly accurate summary," I said. "And now there are photos of you with this actor all over social media, which means Jessica and Brad are probably having simultaneous panic attacks because they basically insulted a celebrity to his face while trying to convince you to settle for less." "Also accurate." Sophie stared at me for a long moment, then burst into laughter. "Maya, this is the most incredible karmic justice I've ever witnessed in real life. They literally brought their own downfall to dinner." Her laughter was infectious, and despite the emotional exhaustion of the evening, I found myself giggling at the absurdity of the situation. "You should have seen Jessica's face when she realized who he was," I said. "I thought she was going to faint right into her wine glass." "I bet Brad is frantically Googling how to apologize to a celebrities right now," Sophie said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh my God, Maya, they must be dying. They spent 2 hours explaining to a famous actor why you're too picky and need to be more realistic about dating." My phone rang, interrupting our laughter. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, her third call in the past hour. I looked at Sophie, who shook her head emphatically.
Don't answer it, she said. Let her stew in her own panic for a while. After what they put you through tonight, she can wait until you're ready to deal with her. I let the call go to voicemail, but the interruption had broken the spell of our shared amusement. The reality of my situation was starting to sink in, and it felt overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sophie, what am I supposed to do now? There are strangers on the internet dissecting my appearance and speculating about my personal life. Jessica is having some kind of meltdown because she insulted someone famous. And somewhere in Austin, there's a celebrity who spent his Saturday night defending my right to have standards in dating. First, Sophie said practically, you're going to take a shower and get into comfortable pajamas because you look like you're about to collapse. Then we're going to order Thai food and process this whole situation like rational adults. And tomorrow, if you want to, you can decide whether you ever want to speak to Jessica again. The shower felt like a form of baptism, washing away the emotional residue of dinner at the rooftop grill. Under the hot water, I allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding back during the confrontation with Jessica and Brad. Anger at their manipulation and condescension, humiliation at being ambushed in public, confusion about Ryan's defense of me and what it meant, anxiety about suddenly being thrust into public attention I'd never wanted or asked for. But underneath all those complicated emotions was something else. Relief. For the first time in months, someone had validated my approach to dating and relationships. Someone had looked at my supposed character flaws and found them admirable rather than problematic. Someone had understood that wanting respect and compatibility wasn't the same as demanding perfection. When I emerged from the bathroom in my softest pajamas, Sophie had already ordered pad thai and spring rolls from our favorite restaurant. She'd also apparently been monitoring social media, because her laptop was open again, and her expression was more serious than before. Maya, she said carefully, I think there's something else you need to know about tonight. I settled onto the couch beside her, noting the tension in her voice. What now? She turned the laptop screen toward me, showing a video that had been posted to Instagram about 30 minutes earlier. The account belonged to someone named @Austin Foodie, and the video showed Ryan walking through the rooftop grill's dining room, moving with purpose toward what was clearly our table. The person filming had captured the moment from a distance, but the audio was surprisingly clear. I can't believe he's here, a woman's voice whispered off camera. Should I go say something? Should I ask for a photo? Don't bother him while he's eating. Someone else replied. But keep filming, maybe we'll see who he's with. The video continued for almost 2 minutes, showing Ryan's arrival at our table, his introductions, and the beginning of our dinner conversation. Whoever was filming had a clear view of our corner table, and while the audio wasn't perfect, certain phrases were audible. Something like that, Ryan's voice said, in response to my question about his work in entertainment. But I'm much more interested in hearing about what you do, Maya, came through clearly, along with his follow-up questions about my job and interests. The video cut off abruptly, but there was enough content to provide context for what had followed. Comments beneath the post were already speculating about the identity of Maya, and debating whether this was a romantic dinner or a business meeting. There's more, Sophie said grimly, switching to another browser tab. Someone else got video of the confrontation. This second video was grainier, and obviously shot from farther away, but it captured the moment when Jessica had leaned forward to address my unrealistic standards. The audio was mostly indecipherable, but Ryan's body language was unmistakably defensive, and my obvious distress was visible even from across the restaurant. Trouble in Paradise. The original poster had captioned the video, "Mystery date night takes a dramatic turn." I watched myself in these stolen moments, seeing my own reactions from an outside perspective for the first time. The way my shoulders had tensed when Jessica started her intervention. The way I'd looked down at my hands when Brad made his comment about lowering the bar. The way my posture had straightened when Ryan began defending my standards. Maya, Sophie said gently, are you okay? I know this has to be overwhelming. I'm trying to process it all, I said honestly. This morning I was just a normal person going about my normal life. Tonight I'm someone that strangers feel entitled to photograph and discuss online. It's surreal and invasive, and I don't know how to handle it. My phone buzzed with another call from Jessica. This time I answered, partly because I was tired of the constant notifications, and partly because I knew I'd have to deal with her eventually. Maya, thank God. Jessica's voice was tight with panic. I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk. About what, Jessica? I asked, my voice flat. About tonight. About what happened at dinner. About the fact that you were on a date with Ryan Mitchell and didn't think to mention it. The accusation in her tone sparked fresh anger. I didn't mention it because I didn't know, I said. Remember, you set up this date. You told me he was just some normal guy from LA who worked behind the scenes in entertainment. You spent the entire evening explaining why my standards were unrealistic while sitting across from someone who perfectly embodies everything I've been looking for in a partner. We didn't know who he was, Jessica said defensively. Brad met him at some industry event, and he seemed nice but normal. How were we supposed to know he was famous? That's not the point, Jessica. The point is that you orchestrated an entire evening designed to convince me that wanting respect and compatibility makes me difficult to date. You brought me to a public restaurant to systematically tear down my self-worth, and when someone defended my right to have standards, you acted like my preferences were suddenly reasonable, because they came from a celebrity. There was silence on the other end of the line, and when Jessica spoke again, her voice was smaller. Maya, we were just trying to help. You've been single for so long, and we thought maybe you needed a different perspective.
Hey!
A different perspective, I repeated.
You mean your perspective?
You wanted me to adopt your values and priorities, because you couldn't understand mine. You couldn't conceive of someone choosing intellectual connection over financial status, or emotional intelligence over social prestige. That's not fair, Jessica protested. We just think you're missing out on good relationships, because you're too focused on finding someone perfect. Perfect, I said, feeling 2 years of frustration crystallize into clarity. Jessica, what about my standards strikes you as a demand for perfection? I want someone who treats people with kindness. I want someone who can have a meaningful conversation. I want someone who sees my mind as an asset rather than a liability. Are those really such extraordinary demands? When you put it like that, Jessica's voice trailed off. When I put it honestly, you mean? When I describe what I actually want instead of letting you characterize my standards as some impossible fantasy. Jessica, I've never asked for a man who looks like a movie star, or makes millions of dollars or drives a Ferrari. I've asked for a man who treats me like an equal partner, and values the same things I do. The fact that you find that unrealistic says more about the men in your social circle than it does about my expectations. Sophie was watching me with something that looked like pride, nodding encouragingly as I finally articulated what I'd been thinking for months, but had never been brave enough to say out loud. Look, Jessica said, and I could hear her shifting gears, trying to find a new approach. Maybe we were wrong about some things.
You mean.
Maybe your standards aren't as unrealistic as we thought. But Maya, do you understand what happened tonight? Do you realize that you were on a date with one of the most eligible bachelors in Hollywood? There are photos of you two together all over social media. People are trying to figure out who you are. I'm aware, I said dryly. It's been an educational introduction to how strangers feel entitled to discuss your appearance and speculate about your personal life. This could be incredible for you, Jessica continued, her excitement building. Think about the opportunities, the connections, the lifestyle. Maya, this guy could change your entire life. And there it was. The fundamental difference between Jessica's worldview and mine, laid bare in a single sentence. She saw Ryan as an opportunity, a ticket to a different lifestyle, a way to access wealth and status and social connections. She couldn't understand that what had attracted me to him wasn't his fame or fortune, but his kindness, intelligence, and respect for my values. Jessica, I said quietly, if you think I'm interested in Ryan because of who he is, rather than how he treated me, then you understand nothing about what I want in a relationship. And if you think tonight's humiliation
was worth it because it might lead to opportunities and lifestyle changes, then you understand nothing about who I am as a person. I didn't mean it like that, she backpedaled quickly. I just meant that maybe this is proof that your standards aren't impossible. Maybe there are men out there who can meet your expectations. There have always been men out there who could meet my expectations, I said. The problem isn't that those men don't exist. The problem is that I've been told my entire adult life that expecting to meet them makes me difficult and demanding. The problem is that I've been surrounded by people who think wanting respect and compatibility is asking too much. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jessica and I both knew that our friendship had reached a breaking point, that the differences in our values and priorities were too fundamental to bridge with casual conversation and shared history. Maya, Jessica said finally. I don't want to lose our friendship over this. Then stop trying to change who I am, I replied. Stop treating my standards like character flaws that need correcting. Stop setting me up with men you think will teach me to be more realistic about what I deserve. Accept that I know what I want and trust that I'm capable of making my own decisions about my romantic life. I can do that, Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Can you? I asked. Because for the past 2 years, every conversation we've had about dating has been you explaining why my approach is wrong and why I need to adjust my expectations. Tonight you brought me to dinner specifically to demonstrate why I should settle for someone who doesn't share my values or respect my intelligence. That's not friendship, Jessica. That's manipulation disguised as concern. After I hung up, Sophie and I sat in comfortable silence while we waited for our Thai food to arrive. The apartment felt peaceful after the emotional intensity of the restaurant and the phone call, a sanctuary where I could process everything that had happened without judgment or unwanted advice. You know, Sophie said eventually, I've been thinking about what that guy Ryan said tonight, about how your standards aren't the problem but everyone else's lack of standards is the problem. I think he's right. What do you mean? I mean that for as long as I've known you, you've been apologizing for wanting what you want. You've been told that expecting intelligence and kindness and compatibility makes you too picky, so you've internalized the idea that there's something wrong with your approach to dating. But there's nothing wrong with having standards. There's something wrong with a culture that tells women to be grateful for any attention, regardless of how that attention makes them feel about themselves. Her words echoed Ryan's observations from earlier in the evening, and I felt that same sense of validation and relief. For years I'd been made to feel like my approach to relationships was fundamentally flawed, like wanting emotional connection and intellectual compatibility made me demanding and unrealistic. I think I've been gaslighted, I said slowly, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. Not maliciously maybe, but systematically. I've been told so many times that my standards are too high that I started to believe it myself. I started to think that maybe I was being unreasonable, maybe I was asking for too much. But you weren't, Sophie said firmly. You were asking for basic respect and compatibility. You were asking to be valued for your mind as well as your appearance. You were asking for partnership instead of settling for someone who would tolerate your interests while expecting you to be grateful for their attention. The Thai food arrived as we were deep in this conversation and we spread the containers across our coffee table while continuing to process the evening's events. Between bites of pad Thai and spring rolls, I found myself thinking about Ryan's quiet confidence, his thoughtful questions, his immediate understanding of what I'd been trying to articulate for months. Sophie, I said, do you think I'll ever hear from him again? Ryan. She considered the question while chewing thoughtfully. I don't know. Tonight was pretty intense, and he's probably used to keeping his personal life private, but Maya, the way he defended you tonight, the way he understood exactly what you were dealing with, that wasn't someone just being polite to a stranger. That was someone who genuinely connected with who you are and what you value. Maybe, I said, but he's also a celebrity with a complicated public life, who probably doesn't need the drama of being photographed with some random woman from Austin. He could have anyone. Why would he be interested in someone like me? Someone like you? Sophie raised an eyebrow. You mean someone intelligent, accomplished, kind and principled. Someone who values substance over superficiality and treats people with respect regardless of their social status. Maya, any man would be lucky to have your attention, famous or not. Don't let Jessica's toxic perspective make you doubt your own worth. As we finished dinner and cleaned up the containers, I felt something shifting inside me. The anger and humiliation from earlier in the evening were giving way to something that felt like resolve. For the first time in months, I had clarity about what I wanted and confidence that wanting those things didn't make me unreasonable. I think I'm done, I said suddenly. Done with what? Done apologizing for having standards. Done explaining why I want respect and compatibility. Done listening to people tell me that my expectations are unrealistic when what I'm really expecting is basic human decency and shared values. Sophie smiled. Good, it's about time. I'm also done with Jessica, I continued. I'm done with friends who think they know better than I do about what will make me happy. I'm done with people who try to fix my life by changing who I am instead of accepting that I know what I want. Even better. And I'm done dating men who make me feel like I need to apologize for being intelligent or educated or opinionated. I'm done with guys who think my love of books is pretentious or my interest in meaningful conversation is demanding. Best of all, Sophie said, raising her water glass in a mock toast. Here's to Maya Chen, who finally figured out that the problem was never her standards. As we sat on our couch in our comfortable apartment, surrounded by the evidence of our independent, successful lives, I realized that I didn't need anyone else's validation to know that my approach to relationships was sound. I didn't need a celebrity to defend my standards or a public confrontation to prove that my expectations were reasonable. What I needed was exactly what I'd always needed: the confidence to trust my own judgment, and the courage to refuse anything less than what I knew I deserved. Tonight had been painful and humiliating and overwhelming, but it had also been clarifying in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I felt completely comfortable with who I was and what I wanted. And for the first time in my adult life, I truly believed that wanting respect and partnership and intellectual connection didn't make me difficult or demanding or unrealistic. It made me smart. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of brilliant Austin sunshine that made everything seem possible. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in months, despite the emotional intensity of the previous evening. Sophie was already in the kitchen making coffee, her laptop open on the counter as she scrolled through what appeared to be an endless stream of social media notifications. "Good morning, internet sensation," she said without looking up from her screen. "How are you feeling about your newfound fame?" I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, noting the slight tension in her voice. "Well, the good news is that most people seem to think you're pretty and mysterious. The bad news is that someone figured out your name and workplace, and there are photographers camped outside Bloom Marketing Agency." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter in my mouth. Photographers? How did they even find out where I work? Sophie turned her laptop toward me, showing a Twitter thread that had apparently been gaining traction since the early morning hours. Someone had enhanced the restaurant photos from the night before, zooming in on my face and running it through facial recognition software. From there they'd found my LinkedIn profile, my company website bio, and even my college graduation photo from the University of Texas Alumni magazine. Maya Chen, 28, marketing coordinator at Bloom Marketing Agency. Sophie read from the screen. Graduate of UT Austin with a degree in communications. Hobbies include reading, hiking, and apparently dating A-list celebrities. The internet detectives work fast. I scrolled through the comments beneath the thread, watching strangers dissect every aspect of my appearance and background. They'd found my Instagram account, which was mercifully private, but that hadn't stopped them from analyzing my profile picture and speculating about everything from my ethnicity to my relationship history. "She's pretty but not Hollywood pretty," one comment read. "Maybe he's going for the girl next door type now." I looked up her company, another person had written. "She makes like $40,000 a year. What could they possibly have in common?" Plot twist, a third commenter suggested. Maybe she's the one who dumped him and that's why he looked so intense in those restaurant photos. Each comment felt like a small invasion, strangers making assumptions about my life based on fragments of information they'd pieced together from public records and social media. The casual cruelty of their speculation was breathtaking, the way they discussed my worthiness to be in Ryan's presence as if I were a contestant on some reality dating show. My phone rang, interrupting my descent into internet rabbit holes. The number wasn't one I recognized, but something about the timing made me answer anyway. "Maya, this is David Chen, your brother. I just got off the phone with Mom, who apparently saw your face on some entertainment blog this morning. She's freaking out and wants to know if you're dating someone famous and why you didn't tell the family." I closed my eyes, already dreading the conversation that was clearly coming. My parents were wonderful people, but they'd never fully understood my approach to dating and relationships. They'd been gently suggesting for years that I was too selective, that I should focus more on finding someone stable and less on finding someone who shared my interests and values. "David, it's complicated. I went on one date, and it turned into this whole thing because people at the restaurant recognized him and started taking photos." "One date with Ryan Mitchell," David said, and I could hear the amazement in his voice. "Maya, do you understand who this guy is?" Lisa spent the morning showing me clips from his movies and explaining why this is apparently a big deal. "I know who he is now," I said. I didn't when I agreed to the date. Jessica set it up and told me he was just some normal guy from LA. Jessica, David repeated, his tone shifting. The same Jessica who's been telling you for years that you're too picky about guys. The very same. There was a pause while David processed this information, so let me make sure I understand this. Jessica, who thinks your standards are unrealistic, accidentally set you up with someone who perfectly matches everything you've been looking for in a partner. And now there are paparazzi following you around because the internet has decided you're his mysterious new girlfriend. That's a fairly accurate summary of my weekend so far. David laughed, a sound that was equal parts amusement and disbelief. Maya, this is either the best vindication of your dating strategy ever, or the universe playing the most elaborate practical joke in history. I'm leaning toward practical joke, I said, watching Sophie scroll through increasingly invasive social media posts about my personal life. David, there are people online analyzing my college transcripts and speculating about my financial situation. This morning I'm not just Maya, who has opinions about books and politics. I'm Maya who might be dating someone famous, which apparently makes every detail of my life fair game for public consumption. Are you okay? David asked, his voice growing more serious. This has to be overwhelming. I'm trying to process it all. Yesterday I was just a normal person going about my normal life. Today I'm hiding in my apartment because there are photographers outside my office building. It's surreal. What about the guy? Ryan, are you actually interested in him, or was this just a disaster date that got out of hand? The question hung in the air while I tried to formulate an answer. How could I explain that I'd felt more understood and valued during 3 hours with a stranger than I had during months of dates with men my friends considered more appropriate? How could I describe the way Ryan had immediately grasped what I was looking for in a relationship and defended my right to want those things? I don't know, I said honestly. He was different. Not because of who he is professionally, but because of how he treated me. He listened when I talked, asked thoughtful questions, understood what I was looking for without making me feel like my standards were unreasonable. But he's also a celebrity with a complicated public life, who probably doesn't need the drama of being associated with someone who comes with this kind of media attention. And I'm someone who values privacy and normalness. Neither of which seem compatible with dating someone famous. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Then another. Then a third. Sophie looked up from her laptop with growing concern. Maya, I think you need to see this, she said, turning her screen toward me again. Someone posted your home address on Twitter 20 minutes ago. There are people gathering outside our building. I looked out our living room window and saw what she meant. A small crowd had assembled in the parking lot, some with professional cameras, others just holding phones and filming everything. Our quiet Sunday morning had transformed into a media circus, and I was trapped in the center of it. This is insane, I said, stepping back from the window. I went on one date, one dinner, with someone I didn't even know was famous. How is this level of attention proportional to that? Sophie closed her laptop and came to sit beside me on the couch. It's not proportional. It's invasive and creepy, and completely unfair to you. But Maya, this is probably what Ryan's life is like all the time. Every person he talks to, every place he goes, every relationship he has gets scrutinized and analyzed, and turned into entertainment for strangers. The thought hadn't occurred to me before, but it hit me like a revelation. While I was feeling violated by one day of unwanted attention, Ryan had been living with this level of public scrutiny for years. Every date he went on, every person he was seen with, every casual conversation got photographed and dissected and turned into gossip. How does anyone live like that? I asked quietly. I don't know, Sophie admitted, but I'm guessing it makes forming real relationships incredibly difficult. You can't trust people's motives when everyone wants something from you. You can't have normal experiences when everything gets turned into a public spectacle. My phone rang again, this time with a number I recognized. Emma Walsh, my coworker and one of my closest friends, was calling from what I assumed was her own apartment since she certainly wasn't making it into the office today. Maya, thank God you answered, Emma said without preamble. Are you okay? There are photographers outside the building asking everyone who walks by if they know you. HR is having an absolute meltdown because they don't know how to handle media attention, and Marcus is fielding calls from reporters who want to interview your colleagues about what kind of person you are. Marcus was our CEO, a kind but generally anxious man who preferred dealing with marketing campaigns to managing public relations crises. The idea of him trying to navigate entertainment reporters was almost comical if it weren't so stressful. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never intended for any of this to affect the company. It was just supposed to be a normal dinner with friends. Don't apologize, Emma said firmly. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask for this attention, and you certainly didn't ask for strangers to invade your privacy and disrupt your workplace. But Maya, I think you need to know that some people are being really gross about this whole situation. What do you mean? I mean that there are colleagues who are suddenly very interested in your personal life. People who never gave you the time of day before, but are now asking detailed questions about your dating history and your relationship with this actor. And there are also people making nasty comments about why someone like him would be interested in someone like you. The casual cruelty of that observation stung more than I expected. Even people who knew me, who worked with me every day, were apparently unable to imagine that Ryan might be attracted to my personality or intelligence rather than some ulterior motive. Someone like me, I repeated. I told them they were being idiots, Emma said quickly. I pointed out that you're brilliant and funny, and accomplished, and that anyone would be lucky to have your attention. But Maya, it made me realize how deeply people have internalized the idea that certain men are out of certain women's leagues, regardless of what those women actually bring to a relationship. After I hung up with Emma, I spent the rest of the morning hiding in my apartment while the crowd outside grew larger and more intrusive. Sophie had drawn all the curtains, and we'd moved our activities to the back bedroom, furthest from the street-facing windows. It felt like being under siege, trapped in my own home by people who felt entitled to photograph and analyze every aspect of my life. Around noon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. When I answered, Ryan's voice was warm and concerned. Maya, it's Ryan. I hope I'm not overstepping by calling, but I wanted to check on you after everything that's happened since last night. The sound of his voice was unexpectedly comforting, a reminder that somewhere in Austin was someone who understood exactly what I was experiencing. How did you get my number? I may have asked Brad for it this morning, he admitted. I hope that's okay. I was worried about how you were handling the media attention. You mean the photographers camping outside my apartment and the strangers on the internet analyzing my college transcripts? I'm handling it about as well as you'd expect. Ryan's laugh was rueful. I'm sorry, this is my fault. If I'd been thinking clearly last night, I would have realized that being seen together in public would lead to exactly this kind of scrutiny. I should have warned you, or suggested somewhere more private for dinner. You couldn't have known, I said. I certainly didn't expect one dinner to turn into a media circus. Is it always like this for you? Usually worse, he said honestly. But I've had years to develop coping strategies and security measures. You were thrown into it without warning or preparation. I feel terrible about what you're going through because of me. There was genuine distress in his voice, and I realized that he was probably dealing with his own version of media attention today. While I was hiding in my apartment, he was likely fielding calls from his publicist and manager, trying to control the narrative around our dinner and minimize the impact on his carefully managed public image. Ryan, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you have normal relationships when everything is this public and invasive? How do you trust that people are interested in you as a person rather than as an opportunity or a status symbol? The question hung in the air for a long moment before he answered. Honestly, it's incredibly difficult. Most of the time, I don't even try. It's easier to keep things casual and superficial than to risk getting involved with someone who might be using me for access or attention. That sounds lonely. It is, he said simply, but it's also safe. And after a few experiences with people who were more interested in my career than my personality, safe started to feel more important than connected. I thought about Jessica's reaction when she realized who he was, the way her entire assessment of the evening had shifted once she understood his celebrity status. I thought about the strangers online debating my worthiness to be in his presence, as if my value as a person was determined by whether I was pretty enough or successful enough to deserve his attention. Ryan,
I said slowly. Last night, when Jessica and Brad were explaining why my standards were unrealistic, did you realize they were basically describing you? I mean that everything they said I was wrong to want in a partner, intelligence, curiosity, respect for others, emotional availability, those are exactly the qualities you demonstrated during dinner. They were telling me I needed to lower my expectations while sitting across from someone who perfectly matched what I was looking for. I noticed the irony, he said dryly. It was surreal listening to them explain why you should settle for less, while I was sitting right there thinking you deserved so much more than what they were describing. The thing is, I continued, they only realized their advice was wrong after they found out who you are. Suddenly my standards seemed reasonable because they came from someone they recognized from movies. But if you'd been Ryan Mitchell, accountant, or Ryan Mitchell, teacher, they would have continued insisting that I was being too picky. That says everything about their values, and nothing about the validity of your standards, Ryan said. What you want in a relationship isn't unrealistic. It's basic human decency and compatibility. The fact that your friends can't recognize that without a celebrity endorsement says more about them than it does about you. We talked for another hour, and I found myself relaxing despite the chaos outside my apartment. Ryan understood the surreal nature of sudden media attention, but more importantly, he understood what I'd been trying to articulate about dating and relationships. He didn't make me feel like my standards were too high, or my expectations were unreasonable. He said, as our conversation wound down, I know this situation is complicated and overwhelming, but I want you to know that I'd like to see you again. Not as some public spectacle or media event, but as two people who enjoyed each other's company and want to explore that connection further. Even though dating me apparently comes with photographers and internet speculation about our compatibility. Especially because of that, he said. Because you're handling this invasion of privacy with grace and intelligence, and because you're more concerned about how this affects the people around you than how it might benefit your own social status. In a world where everyone wants something from me, you're someone who seems to want nothing except honest conversation and mutual respect. After we hung up, I sat in my back bedroom thinking about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I'd been Maya Chen, marketing coordinator, single woman with supposedly unrealistic dating standards. Today I was Maya Chen, temporary internet sensation, someone whose worth was being debated by strangers, who felt entitled to analyze every aspect of my life. But somewhere between Jessica's intervention and Ryan's defense, between the social media scrutiny and the media circus, I'd found something I'd been searching for without realizing it. Not romance, exactly, though there was definitely potential for that. What I'd found was validation. Proof that my standards weren't unreasonable, my expectations weren't too high, my approach to relationships wasn't fundamentally flawed. Sophie knocked on the bedroom door around 3 o'clock, carrying 2 cups of tea and looking slightly shell-shocked. Maya, I think you need to see what's happening online now. I followed her back to the living room, where she'd reopened her laptop to show me a new development in the ongoing internet discussion of my personal life. Someone had started a hashtag called #MayaStandards, and it was trending nationwide. The hashtag had started with women sharing their own experiences of being told their dating expectations were unrealistic. Story after story from women who'd been made to feel like wanting respect, kindness and compatibility made them too picky or too demanding. I was told I was too intellectual when I wanted a partner who read books, one post read. Apparently expecting someone to be curious about the world makes me pretentious. My friend said I was being unrealistic when I refused to date guys who were rude to waiters, another woman wrote. Since when is basic human decency an unrealistic standard? I got lectured about lowering my expectations because I wanted someone who could discuss current events, a third post shared. Apparently wanting intellectual connection makes me impossible to please. The hashtag had evolved beyond just dating standards to become a broader conversation about women's right to have expectations and boundaries in all aspects of their lives. Women were sharing stories about being told they were too demanding at work, too difficult in friendships, too high maintenance in family relationships. Maya, Sophie said quietly, I think you accidentally started a movement. I scrolled through hundreds of posts, each one resonating with experiences I recognized from my own life. The constant message that wanting more made you difficult. The subtle pressure to lower your standards and be grateful for whatever attention you received. The way women were taught to apologize for having preferences and expectations. This is incredible, I said, watching the hashtag continue to gain momentum. All these women have been told the same things I've been told. We've all been made to feel like wanting respect and compatibility makes us unreasonable. And now they have proof that those standards aren't unrealistic. Sophie pointed out. They have evidence that men who meet those expectations actually exist, and that refusing to settle for less is a valid choice. My phone rang again, this time with a call from my parents. I answered reluctantly, knowing they'd been following the social media developments throughout the day. "My sweetheart," my mother's voice was warm but concerned. "Your father and I have been watching this whole situation unfold online, and we wanted you to know how proud we are of you." "Proud?" I asked, surprised by her response. "Proud of the way you've handled yourself," my father said, apparently on speakerphone. "Proud of the standards you've maintained, even when people told you they were unrealistic. Proud of the woman you've become who refuses to settle for less than she deserves." "Mom, Dad, for years you've been suggesting that maybe I should be
more flexible about dating, that maybe my expectations were a little high." "We were wrong," my mother said simply. "Watching this whole situation play out, seeing how you've been vindicated in your approach, reading all these stories from other women who've had similar experiences, we realize we were part of the problem. We should have been supporting your standards instead of questioning them." The conversation with my parents lasted another 30 minutes, during which they apologized for every suggestion that I should lower my expectations or be more realistic about dating. They'd spent the day reading through the #Maya Standards hashtag and recognizing their own unconscious biases about what women should accept in relationships. As evening approached, the crowd outside my apartment finally began to disperse. The photographers had apparently gotten whatever shots they needed, and the curious onlookers had grown bored with the lack of drama. Sophie and I ventured back to our living room windows, watching the street return to its normal quiet Sunday atmosphere. "Maya," Sophie said as we surveyed the aftermath of our unexpected day of fame, "what are you going to do now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean about Ryan. About the media attention, about the fact that your personal life has become a public discussion topic. Are you going to hide until this dies down, or are you going to figure out how to navigate it?" I considered the question while watching the last few stragglers pack up their cameras and equipment. 24 hours ago, the idea of dating someone famous would have seemed overwhelming and impossible. The loss of privacy, the constant scrutiny, the way every interaction would be analyzed and dissected by strangers seemed like too high a price to pay for any relationship. But today had taught me something important about myself and about what I valued. I discovered that my standards really weren't unreasonable, that wanting respect and compatibility wasn't asking too much, that refusing to settle for less than I deserved was a strength rather than a character flaw. I'd also discovered that Ryan understood all of this intuitively, that he valued the same things I did, that he saw my intelligence and independence as assets rather than obstacles. The media attention was overwhelming and invasive, but it was also temporary. The connection we'd begun to build during dinner felt real and worth exploring. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm going to see where this goes. Not because he's famous, but because he's exactly the kind of person I've been hoping to find. Someone who understands what I want and why I want it. Someone who makes me feel valued for who I am rather than apologetic for what I expect." Sophie smiled and raised her teacup in a mock toast. "Here's to Maya Chen, who refused to lower her standards and ended up proving they were exactly right all along." As night fell over Austin and our apartment returned to its normal peaceful quiet, I reflected on the whirlwind of the past day. I'd been humiliated and defended, scrutinized and celebrated, criticized and vindicated. I'd watched strangers dissect my life and debate my worthiness, but I'd also seen thousands of women recognize their own experiences in my story. Most importantly, I'd learned that trusting my own judgment about what I wanted in a relationship had been the right choice all along. I didn't need anyone else's permission to have standards. I didn't need external validation to know that expecting respect and compatibility was reasonable. For the first time in years, I felt completely confident in who I was and what I deserved. The media attention would fade, the hashtag would be replaced by the next trending topic, and eventually the internet would find someone else to analyze and discuss. But the lesson would remain that knowing what you want and refusing to settle for less isn't unrealistic or demanding or difficult. It's simply knowing your own worth and having the courage to insist that others recognize it too. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who already does. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful dinner at the rooftop grill, and Austin had settled back into its familiar rhythm of breakfast tacos, live music, and tech startups. The media frenzy had died down considerably, though I still occasionally spotted my face in grocery store tabloids with headlines like "Mystery Woman Who Stole Hollywood's Heart" and "The Normal Girl Who Changed Everything." The absurdity of these descriptions never failed to make me laugh, especially the implication that being normal was somehow noteworthy in a world obsessed with celebrity culture. The #Maya Standards hashtag had evolved into something bigger than anyone could have predicted. What started as women sharing their dating experiences had transformed into a broader movement about self-worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve in all aspects of life. Universities were hosting panel discussions about relationship expectations, dating apps were revising their algorithms to prioritize compatibility over superficial attraction, and countless women were sharing stories about finally finding partners who valued their intelligence and independence. I'd received interview requests from major magazines, book deal offers from publishers, and speaking invitations from organizations across the country. The irony wasn't lost on me that people suddenly wanted to hear my thoughts on relationships and self-respect, when just a month ago I'd been told by my closest friends that my standards were unrealistic and needed adjustment. But the most significant change in my life wasn't the public attention or the unexpected platform I'd been given to discuss women's empowerment. It was the quiet evolution of my relationship with Ryan, which had developed away from the spotlight and social media speculation. We'd been seeing each other regularly, always in private settings where we could talk without photographers documenting our every expression and gesture. Ryan had a way of making our unusual circumstances feel normal. He understood better than anyone how surreal it was to have strangers analyzing your personal choices, and he developed strategies over the years for maintaining authentic connections despite the artificial constraints of fame. Our dates consisted of long walks through his gated neighborhood, cooking dinner together at his temporary Austin rental, and hours of conversation about everything from environmental policy to obscure literary references. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on his back patio watching the sunset over the hill country, "I've been thinking about what Jessica said that night at dinner, about you having unrealistic standards." "What about it?" I asked, settling more comfortably into the outdoor chair he'd positioned to catch the best view of the sky. "I think she was right, but not in the way she meant. Your standards are unrealistic in the current dating landscape because most people have been conditioned to accept so much less than they deserve. You're expecting things that should be baseline requirements but have somehow become luxury features." I considered his observation while watching the sky transition from blue to orange to deep purple. "It's depressing when you put it that way. Like we've collectively agreed that kindness and respect are optional extras in relationships." "Exactly. And when someone like you comes along and insists on those basics as non-negotiables, people react like you're being impossibly demanding. They've internalized such low expectations that genuine compatibility seems like an unrealistic fantasy." This had become a recurring theme in our conversations over the past few weeks. Ryan had spent years navigating relationships where people were attracted to his status rather than his personality, where potential partners saw him as an opportunity rather than a person. The experience had made him deeply aware of the difference between genuine connection and transactional interaction. "Ryan," I said, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, "can I ask you something that might be uncomfortable?" "Always. How do you know that I'm not just another person who's attracted to your celebrity rather than who you are? How do you trust that my interest is genuine when I'm benefiting from all this media attention?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. It was something I'd been wondering about since our relationship began developing beyond friendship, a nagging concern that maybe I was unconsciously influenced by his fame despite my conscious intentions. "A few reasons," he said finally. "First, you were genuinely upset about the media attention rather than excited by it. Most people who are interested in my status would have been thrilled by the publicity, not hiding in their apartment trying to escape photographers." "That's true," I admitted. "The invasion of privacy was terrifying, not exciting." "Second, you've never asked me about my work or my celebrity friends, or what it's like to be famous." You're interested in my thoughts on books and politics and environmental issues, not my experiences on movie sets or red carpet events. I realized he was right. Our conversations naturally gravitated toward topics that had nothing to do with his career, focusing instead on the ideas and values that we'd discovered we shared. And third, Ryan continued, you've consistently demonstrated that you value substance over surface in every aspect of your life. Your friends were trying to convince you to lower your standards and accept less meaningful connections, and you refused. Someone who's motivated by status and celebrity wouldn't have spent 2 years single rather than settling for men who didn't meet their criteria for genuine partnership. His analysis made sense, but I found myself pushing back against it anyway. But Ryan, I'm benefiting from this situation in ways I never expected. I've got job offers, speaking opportunities, and social media followers I didn't have a month ago. How do you know I'm not unconsciously motivated by those benefits? Because you could have those benefits without me, he said simply. You could leverage your moment of internet fame into whatever career opportunities you want, date whoever you choose, and build whatever public platform appeals to you. The Maya standards movement exists independent of our relationship. You don't need to be with me to maintain the recognition you've gained. The observation was both flattering and sobering. In the weeks since our dinner went viral, I'd realized that my temporary internet celebrity had opened doors I'd never considered before. Publishers wanted to hear my thoughts on modern dating, magazines were interested in my perspective on relationships and self-worth, and speaking bureaus were booking me for events across the country. Actually, I said, I've been meaning to talk to you about some of those opportunities. I got a call this week from a publisher who wants me to write a book about dating standards and self-respect. And there's a conference in Denver next month that wants me to speak about refusing to settle in relationships. Ryan's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Maya, that's incredible. You should absolutely do both of those things. You think so, even though it means more publicity and more public attention focused on our relationship. Especially because of that. You have something important to say about self-worth and expectations, and people need to hear it. Don't let concerns about our privacy stop you from using this platform to help other women. His immediate support for opportunities that would inevitably complicate our already unusual situation said everything I needed to know about his priorities and values. A person motivated primarily by protecting his own interests would have discouraged me from accepting high-profile speaking engagements or writing projects that would keep our relationship in the public eye. There's something else, I continued. The conference wants both of us to speak. They want to present us as an example of what happens when someone refuses to compromise their standards and finds a partner who actually meets them. And how do you feel about that? I'd been wrestling with this question since receiving the invitation. The idea of appearing publicly with Ryan felt like crossing a line from private relationship to public partnership, a step that would inevitably intensify media attention and scrutiny. Nervous, I admitted, but also excited. I think there's value in showing people that the kind of partnership I was looking for actually exists. That refusing to settle isn't naive or unrealistic, but practical and smart. Then we should do it, Ryan said without hesitation. We should show people what it looks like when two adults choose each other based on compatibility and mutual respect rather than convenience or social pressure. As we sat in comfortable silence watching the stars emerge more clearly in the darkening sky, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. Not because of the media attention or the unexpected career opportunities, but because I'd finally found someone who understood and appreciated what I'd been looking for all along. The evening air was perfect for late spring in Austin, warm enough to sit outside but cool enough to be comfortable. Ryan's temporary rental house was situated on several acres outside the city, providing the privacy we'd both craved during our developing relationship. The property felt like a sanctuary from the outside world's constant noise and judgment. Maya, Ryan said eventually, I want to tell you something, and I hope it doesn't sound presumptuous or premature. What is it? I think I'm falling in love with you. Not because you're the first person in years who seems genuinely interested in who I am rather than what I do, and not because you've inadvertently become famous for having the same values I've been looking for in a partner. I'm falling in love with you because you're brilliant and funny and principled, because you challenge me intellectually and support me emotionally, because being with you feels like coming home. The words hung in the air between us, honest and vulnerable in a way that made my heart race. This wasn't a declaration driven by the intensity of our unusual circumstances, or the artificial intimacy created by shared media attention.
This was Ryan, successful actor and thoughtful human being, telling me that he'd found in our relationship exactly what I'd been hoping to find in mine. "I love you too," I said. The words feeling both surprising and inevitable. "I love your curiosity about the world and your kindness to everyone you meet and your complete lack of pretension despite having every reason to be arrogant. I love that you saw through Jessica and Brad's manipulation immediately and defended my right to have standards. I love that you understand what I was looking for because you were looking for the same things." "So where does that leave us?" Ryan asked. "Two people who found exactly what they were hoping for in completely impossible circumstances." "I think," I said slowly, "it leaves us figuring out how to build a real relationship in very unreal conditions. It leaves us learning to trust each other and support each other while dealing with a level of public attention that neither of us asked for. Are you willing to try that, even knowing it's going to be complicated and sometimes overwhelming?" I looked at this man who had appeared in my life at exactly the moment I needed proof that my standards weren't unrealistic, who had defended my right to want respect and compatibility, who had chosen to pursue a relationship with me despite the media circus that surrounded our every interaction. "Yes," I said. "I'm willing to try." Ryan reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers in a gesture that felt both intimate and natural. "Good, because I have some ideas about how we can make this work." Such as being completely honest with each other about what we need and what we're comfortable with. Such as setting clear boundaries about what aspects of our relationship we're willing to share publicly and what we want to keep private. Such as supporting each other's individual goals and careers even when they complicate our personal life. His practical approach to navigating our unusual circumstances reminded me why I'd been attracted to him from the beginning. Here was someone who could see problems clearly and work toward solutions, who didn't expect relationships to be easy, but was willing to put in the effort to make them successful. "I have one more thing to tell you," I said. "And this might be the most complicated part of everything." "What is it?" "Jessica has been calling me every day for the past 2 weeks. She wants to reconcile, to apologize for what happened at dinner, to be part of my new life now that it's gotten more interesting." Ryan's expression darkened slightly. "How do you feel about that?" "Frustrated and sad. Because I realized that Jessica was never really my friend in the way I thought she was. She was someone who felt entitled to manage my life according to her values and priorities, who saw my standards as problems to be solved rather than preferences to be respected. And now that those same standards have been publicly validated, she wants back in." "Exactly. She's not apologizing because she recognizes that her approach was wrong. She's apologizing because she realizes that being associated with me might be socially advantageous now that I have some measure of public recognition." I'd been struggling with the Jessica situation since our relationship ended that night at the rooftop grill. Part of me missed the friendship we'd had in college, the easy camaraderie and shared experiences that had connected us for years. But a larger part of me recognized that the person I'd been friends with then wasn't the same person who had orchestrated that humiliating dinner intervention. "What are you going to do?" Ryan asked. "I think I'm going to let her go. I think I'm going to accept that some friendships don't survive the process of growing into who you're meant to be, and that's okay. I think I'm going to focus on building relationships with people who support my choices rather than trying to change them." Ryan squeezed my hand gently. "That sounds like the right decision. And for what it's worth, I think you've gained something much more valuable than what you lost." "What's that?" "Proof that trusting your own judgment about people and relationships is always the right choice, even when everyone around you is telling you you're wrong." As we sat together in the peaceful darkness of his backyard, I realized that he was absolutely right. The past month had been overwhelming and surreal and occasionally terrifying, but it had also been profoundly validating. Every criticism I'd received about my dating standards, every suggestion that I needed to be more realistic or flexible or grateful, had been proven wrong by the simple fact that I'd found exactly what I was looking for. "Ryan," I said, "do you think we would have found each other under normal circumstances? If Jessica hadn't set up that dinner, if you hadn't been visiting Austin, if none of the media attention had happened?" He considered the question thoughtfully. "I think we would have eventually. Maybe not that night, maybe not in that dramatic way. But I think two people who are looking for the same things in a relationship and refusing to settle for less will eventually find each other, even in a world where most people think those standards are unrealistic. Especially in that world, because people who insist on genuine compatibility stand out in a sea of superficial connections. Because refusing to settle is actually a signal to other people who also refuse to settle." His observation made me think about all the women who had shared their stories through the #Maya Standards hashtag, all the people who had recognized their own experiences and mine. We were a community of individuals who had been told we expected too much, who had been made to feel like our standards were character flaws rather than assets. I want to help other people find what we found, I said suddenly. I want to use whatever platform I've been given to encourage women to trust their instincts about what they want and deserve. Then that's what we'll do, Ryan said. We'll speak at conferences and write books and share our story. And we'll show people that refusing to compromise your values isn't unrealistic or demanding. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship. The conversation continued for another hour as we planned our appearance at the Denver conference and discussed the book I was considering writing. Ryan had insights about maintaining authenticity in the public eye, while I had thoughts about reaching women who were struggling with self-doubt about their relationship expectations. Eventually we moved inside to his living room, where he'd set up a cozy reading nook with 2 comfortable chairs and excellent lighting. It had become our favorite spot for evening conversations, a place where we could sit together while reading our respective books and share interesting passages or ideas that struck us. Maya, Ryan said as we settled into our chairs with novels we'd both been wanting to read, I have something else I want to discuss with you. What is it? I'm thinking about making Austin my permanent base instead of Los Angeles. I love it here. I love the music scene and the food culture and the way people prioritize quality of life over career advancement. But mostly I love that this is where you are and where you've built your life. The casual way he mentioned upending his entire professional and personal life to be closer to me took my breath away. Ryan, that's a huge decision. Are you sure you want to make that kind of change? I'm sure that I want to build a life with you, and I'm sure that life will be better if we're in the same city. The rest is just logistics. But your career, your agent, your professional network, are all adaptable. Maya, I've been successful enough in my career that I can afford to be selective about projects and location. And honestly, spending time in Austin has reminded me that there's more to life than work and professional achievement. His willingness to prioritize our relationship over career convenience was both touching and slightly overwhelming. What if this doesn't work out? What if we're wrong about each other? Or the media attention becomes too much? Or we discover that we're not as compatible as we think we are? Then I'll have spent some time living in a city I love, exploring a relationship with someone I care about, and learning more about what I want in life. There are worse ways to invest a year or two. His practical approach to risk and uncertainty reminded me why I'd been attracted to him from the beginning. Ryan didn't expect guarantees or certainty before making important decisions. He was willing to invest in possibilities and trust his judgment about what was worth pursuing. Besides, he continued with a slight smile, I think we're past the point of wondering whether we're compatible. We've spent 3 weeks talking about everything from politics to poetry. We've navigated an international media circus together, and we still genuinely enjoy each other's company. If that's not proof of compatibility, I don't know what is. As I sat in his comfortable living room, surrounded by books and good lighting, and the kind of thoughtful comfort that comes from someone paying attention to what makes you happy, I realized that this was exactly what I'd been hoping to find. Not a perfect person or a perfect relationship, but a genuine partnership with someone who shared my values and supported my goals. Okay, I said, let's try it. Let's figure out how to build a life together in Austin, speak at conferences about refusing to settle, and see where this leads us. Really? Really? But I have one condition. What's that? When people ask us how we met, we tell them the truth. We tell them about Jessica's intervention and your defense of my standards and the way it all backfired spectacularly. We tell them that the best relationships happen when you refuse to compromise what matters to you. Ryan laughed, a sound that had become one of my favorite things about spending time with him. Deal. Though I think we should probably mention that most people don't need to go viral on social media to find their person. True. But sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about how it brings people together. 6 months later, I was standing on a stage in Denver looking out at an audience of several hundred people who had come to hear Ryan and me speak about relationship standards and the courage to refuse to settle. The conference had sold out weeks in advance, and there were requests for similar events in cities across the country. The most important thing I learned from this experience, I said into the microphone, is that trusting your own judgment about what you want and deserve is never wrong, even when everyone around you is telling you to be more realistic. Especially when everyone around you is telling you to be more realistic. The audience laughed, and I spotted several women nodding in recognition. In the front row, a young woman was taking notes furiously, and I remembered being her age, and feeling like my expectations for relationships were somehow character flaws that needed correcting. People will tell you that having standards makes you difficult, I continued. They'll suggest that expecting respect and compatibility makes you unrealistic. They'll encourage you to lower your expectations and be grateful for whatever attention you receive. But here's what I've learned. The right person won't see your standards as obstacles to overcome. They'll see them as evidence that you know your own worth. After the conference, Ryan and I drove back to Austin in comfortable silence, both of us processing the emotional intensity of sharing our story with such a large and engaged audience. The questions during the Kenda session had been thoughtful and sometimes heartbreaking, revealing how many people had internalized messages about settling for less than they deserved. Do you think we're making a difference? I asked as we crossed the city limits back into Austin. I think we're giving people permission to trust themselves, Ryan said. And sometimes that's all someone needs to change their entire approach to relationships and self-worth. As we pulled into the driveway of the house we'd bought together in the hills west of Austin, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that evening at the rooftop grill. Not because of the media attention or the unexpected career opportunities, but because I'd finally found someone who understood that wanting respect and compatibility wasn't unrealistic or demanding. It was simply knowing what love was supposed to feel like and refusing to accept anything less. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.